Let's get one thing straight. You are never ordinary. Something about you stood out from the moment you arrived on planet. The way you move, think, and stand out when others try to blend in. Some people sensed it. Some folks enjoyed it. Some individuals loathed it. Because of power, true strength does not have to proclaim itself. It just exists. And that's why they huddled in dark corners and behind barred doors, mumbling your name as if you were in danger. They felt that if they prepared hard and long enough, they would be able to alter the trajectory of your fate. They believed that their jealousy, deception, and painstakingly planned schemes would break you. However, they could not realize this. They were defeated when they attacked you because you revealed them. You are being examined. You are impenetrable. They thought they were invisible, but forces greater than themselves were listening. They thought they could write your demise. However, the ink never touched the page. And now the change begins. The atmosphere shifted. The air thickens because this is the time when everything goes your way. Allow them to talk. Let them plan. Allow them to believe they have the upper hand. Nothing changes because it is of superior quality. That's you. Nobody can take it away. The room recoiled, as if the walls understood something that the people within did not. The air thickened, pressing against their lungs and demanding respect. Then, like a fracture in reality, an unseen but unstoppable force arose, cut through the darkness, creating energy waves to spread over the region. What had appeared familiar only seconds before. The murmurs were drowned out by the gloomy lighting. The illusion of control became odd and meaningless. A massive power arrived, capable of breaking their resolve. It didn't speak in echoes or thunder, but its sheer presence shattered their trust. A command, simple yet uncompromising, it has embedded itself in their whole spirit, searing their arrogance like fire through fragile paper. Don't extend your hand. The words did not need repetition. The connotation was clear. Every perfectly created mirage fell before their eyes. Their objectives are now ineffective in the face of something much greater. Fear. It took hold in its raw, unadulterated state. The location that once provided privacy has become a jail. They were the prisoners. Panic gripped their throats as the impulse to run overcame all else. They had gone unnoticed for far too long, assuming that silence equaled consent. He appeared indifferent about the steps they took in secret. Their plans proceed without resistance. However, there is always a moment when patients' lives expire. There is always a time when the unseen hand of justice acts. What they didn't realize was that they had already crossed the barrier. They mistaken silence for absence, forgetting that every whisper, lie, and decision had been recorded. And now, as they stood shivering on the wrong side of an imaginary line, they knew too late that they had never been free of repercussions. What they want to seize, what they believed they could break, was never within reach. The power they dismissed as intangible has always surrounded itself. Shielding, protecting, and monitoring had accidentally called the one thing they should have feared most. Their belief in their own supremacy had been their downfall. They felt untouchable for a moment, but then they made their decision. There would be no negotiation. An abrupt shift in the atmosphere. The breath was taken from their lungs in a subtle but absolute way. The change was not announced with hostility. It did not fall in fury. It came with a far more awful conclusion. Their palms shook before their minds could grasp why words that had always been so simple to pronounce felt like shards in their throats. The energy that had entered the room required no spectacular display or dramatic exposure. It simply was. And that alone was enough to dismantle every lie they had manufactured. The confidence that had pushed them only minutes before collapsed beneath the weight of something inexplicable. And then the words came, not in rage or threat, but in a tone that left no room for defiance. This marks the end. They had no defense against it. There was no argument to provide. The foundation of their confidence had crumbled, leaving them empty. They had not got here by chance, fate, or luck. They had built this moment for themselves with every decision, lie, and error. What they had previously considered as powerless now stood before them indisputably, and they were left with just the undeniable truth. They had overstepped, and there was no going back. They attempted to rationalize and plead. However, They had lost their ability to act. A force greater than words had fallen on them, imprisoning every notion, reason, and desperate attempt at resistance inside their own minds. There was no room for disagreement or revolt. The choice had been made, and it came with a better knowledge. It was absolute. This wasn't only an opportunity to flee. It was the last instant before all paths disappeared entirely. What had previously been confidence did not just vanish. It was demolished. Something within them cracked. Something ancient, anchored in the depths of existence itself. It was such a profound revelation of dominance over an authority that the body reacted before the mind could process it. This was not fear, as they had anticipated. This was a fear that went beyond logic, understanding, and survival itself. One of them attempted to keep his limbs steady, but his body betrayed him with trembling hands and a quivering breath. Another individual clenched his fists, teeth grinding together. But it did nothing to conceal the tangible horror coursing through him. Someone took a halting step backward, as if instinct sensed the need for space the best. Among them, the one whose comments had previously been laced with malice sought to swallow. However, the dryness in his mouth made this a tough task. The air did not just press down. It tightened around them like an invisible chain, forcing compliance. It wasn't heat, suffocation, or weight in the physical sense, but something quite else, an undeniable force that robbed them of their illusions. They had come in as hunters, but now they were nothing more than prey, defenseless, weak, and entirely dependent on whatever lied ahead of them. Then one of them collapsed, not from a collision or exhaustion, but as if his body felt something. His mind refused to accept. The prospect of standing in this presence had become inconceivable. Another fumbled his breath, automatically shouting for help despite the fact that there was no way out. A third rushed desperately for the wall, his fingers clawing against the rough stone, attempting to anchor himself against the overwhelming weight of the situation. There was no stability or somewhere to hide. There were no whispered plans to rescue the moment. Every precisely planned tactic and secret move had shattered in front of their own eyes. They had spent countless nights building a cosmos in which they had perfect power, where everything obeyed their will and the rules were decided by them. They had spoken about their target as if they were insignificant, as if their actions had no consequences. Beyond the game they thought they were playing. But there was no more laughter. There were no words at all. Even the thought of speaking had become far away. Impossible. Their own bodies had turned against them, showing the depths of their horror in ways they couldn't contain. They had convinced themselves that there would be no repercussions, that their actions were invisible, and that their power was unlimited. But now, in the horrible calm that followed, the truth was plain and inescapable. What they had rejected as impotent had demolished their illusions in an instant, and there was no getting away from what they had summoned. No weapon will be used against them, and no one will speak up against them in judgment. You must condemn. Isaiah 5417. It always starts the same way. The envious gather in secret, thinking they can modify something that was never theirs to govern. They whisper, they plot, they stroll in the shadows, believing that their deeds will influence the future. However, fate is not something that can be taken. Favors are not something you can bargain over. You don't take what God has supplied. A candle does not combat darkness. It simply exists. In doing so, it succeeds. But what happens when those who like the darkness want to eradicate it? They assume they are in charge. They assume their grip is strong enough to contain what is meant to shine. However, when they fight or reach out, they encounter a reality they did not anticipate. Light cannot be extinguished by hands that were not intended to touch it. One of them, the impulsive one, who had always felt that power belonged to those who had it, tried to preserve his own dream. He clung to denial like a drowning man clutching air, frantically seeking something that no longer existed. His thoughts raced, searching for an explanation or rationale to make sense of what was occurring. He wanted to say, "This is not real. It's simply fear playing tricks on us." However, horror does not need an invitation to be real. And the truth? The truth does not seek permission before being acknowledged. It simply is. They had entered into something they didn't comprehend. something far greater than them, something that did not adhere to human will. Their whole world. They wrapped their confidence around themselves like armor. They spoke with certainty. They thought they had the upper hand. Shattered in an instant. There were no more whispered conversations, smug grins, or confident glances exchanged. The arrogance that had previously defined them had evaporated, leaving behind something rawer, more real. Survival. It was never their battle to fight. This was never their struggle to win. They interpreted inactivity for weakness. They had misled patience about approval. However, once crossed, some lines make retreat difficult. Certain actions cannot be undone, and the cost of their mistake has already been established. Some fights conclude before they even start. And this wasn't just a loss. This was the end of their fantasy. The moment they realized they had never had control. And now, they stopped scheming. They were not collaborating. They weren't even thinking. They were running. Their thoughts raced, looking for a way out. Will their collapse occur quickly? Or would it grow with time, unraveling them piece by piece? Will their names fade? Their influence has been gone. Their legacy, rewritten into nothingness. The unknown yawned before them, vast and terrible. For the first time, they were concerned about what came after the next breath. Usually, one of them makes the most noise. He opened his lips, as if arguing or pleading. However, silence consumed his words before they could be formed. His voice was caught. His rationale was rendered worthless when confronted with something that communicated without the need to be heard. Then comes clarity, not in images or words, but in something deeper, something recognizable. They didn't merely see their future. They felt it, the importance of their choices. They had established a path. They had caused their own disaster. Everything became as palpable as the ground underneath them. This was no warning. This was a premeditated outcome. We're just waiting for their last step. Stay and be absorbed. Leave to pray. They were still allowed to. Their bodies had already made the decision before their brains could process it independently. Without saying anything, they turned away. They couldn't escape the knowledge that drove them. Some forces cannot be overcome. Stop. Yes, you. This is not for everyone. Some will pass it by, unmoved, untouched. But if something inside you stirs, if something in these words pulls at your soul, you know it's meant for you. Those who do not fit in and do not live up to the expectations placed on them. Those who were never meant to be silent, never meant to be ordinary. Some individuals persist with tried and true techniques. But not you. You are the defect in the illusion, the relentless power and uncontrolled storm. The world does not understand you because it was never meant to, but you do not exist. For their comfort, for their acceptance, for their approval, you stand out. Not because you want to, but because you're supposed to. You aren't here to fit in. You're here to succeed. They all broke at once. A disorderly swarm of frenzied activity that tripped over itself in its desperate haste to flee. They had confidence. The arrogance that had previously driven their every decision had been taken away, leaving just instinct. The primal instinct to escape. The air clung to them, heavy and suffocating, a reminder of what had inhabited that place only seconds before. Some escaped into the darkness, moving aimlessly, hoping that the distance would erase what had happened. Others collapsed down, clutching their chests and struggling against an invisible weight that would not let them go. One fell, entirely locked in place. His mind could not reconcile the reality he had just seen with the world he had previously believed in. None of them dared to pause, question, or look back because what lay between them was not to be addressed. It was something to be endured. And as they ran, the realization set in slowly and terribly. This wasn't only the collapse of a scheme or the revelation of a perfectly prepared lie. This was far worse. The message was delivered, one that needed no more explanation. Some folks were shaken to their core. They recited sentences they hadn't spoken in years, hoping to find comfort in something bigger than themselves. They weren't sure if their requests would be heard. Others, unwilling to submit to the terror, tried to convince themselves that what they had seen was nothing more than panic, an illusion induced by dread, but no denial could change the truth. They had pushed the boundaries of what should have been left alone. Worse, they had been let to go, not because they fought or won, but because compassion was shown. The darkness consumed them completely, yet the tragedy left an unforgettable mark on their lives. And no matter how far they ran, one truth would haunt them forever. They had come up against something unbreakable, and they were allowed to go not as victors, but as people who had been spared the world outside, continuing on as if nothing had occurred. They knew better. Routine became a performance, a desperate attempt to reclaim the normalcy that had been stolen away from them. However, no amount of fooling could remove the imprint left on them. What happened that night was more than simply a nightmare. It was a wound that refused to heal, and the impression was too ingrained in their consciousness to fade. Sleep turned against them. Every time they closed their eyes, the memory returned. Not in fractured pieces, but in whole, undeniable clarity. The unusually silent and quick transformation in the surroundings. The instant their confidence gave way to panic. The voice. It didn't just haunt their nights. It remained inside them, woven into the fabric of their life. An unseen weight pounds down with unyielding force. Some awakened gasping for air, caught in phantom hands that wouldn't let them go. Others stared blankly at the ceiling, unwilling to sleep, knowing that it would be waiting for them wherever they went. Even in broad daylight, the memory remained with them. Shadows became longer than before. Silence was too thick, and an immovable presence loomed. Neither threatening nor unpleasant, but always attentive. They avoided one another. Their once strong relationship has been irreparably damaged. They were the same people who had previously confided in one another. They barely met each other's gaze. There was nothing else to say. They had all been there. They had all felt it. They all understood. Some tried to drown it out with noise, distractions, loud music, and indulgences that dulled the edges of their thought. However, calm had evolved into a prism, since the truth was always shown in the stillness. The echoes from that night cannot be ignored. One of them, the proudest, the one who had always led, Sat sat at his desk, staring at his hands. The tremors did not cease. He clenched his fists, striving to drive the weakness out of his bones. But deep inside, he knew this couldn't be undone. Nothing that could be explained away. Another, a man who had never prayed before, found himself unable to form words. Speak into the depths. I am not sure whether he was even heard. But he knew one thing. If their observations were correct, everything he had built his life on was a lie. They couldn't grasp it. There were no reasonable or logical answers to explain what had occurred. This wasn't a panic. It was not hysteria. It had not been an illusion. It was authentic. They had all felt it. They'd all overheard it. The most horrible thing was that they had been allowed to go. Not because they outmaneuvered anything. They did not earn their independence. Rather, something let them go. That knowledge sunk deep, snaking throughout their minds. Like an unspoken warning. In their quiet moments alone, the realization gnawed at them viciously. What had invaded that night had killed them before they could even start, and they would never dare to question their past assumptions. You did not need to defend yourself at all. However, you were protected by an unknown force and surrounded by a barrier. No plan, deceit, or whispered conspiracy could penetrate as they spent restless nights devising their strategy. The reply was fully prepared before they even spoke your name in secret. The path had been selected. They believed they were in charge and were closing in. But, in actuality, they had stepped directly into a force beyond their comprehension. What they saw as weakness was never anything less than an impassable wall, an unseen barrier between you and their goals. The quiet they'd regarded as acquiescence had never been neutral. It was the silence before everything changed. And when they felt their preparations were complete, you did not oppose them. They were stopped by something much bigger, which they had not expected. The worry they felt was more than just dread of being discovered. It was the weight of realization. Every quiet conversation, every step was made in secrecy. Every precisely planned action was clear all along. The secret had been exposed. An unrelenting glare reduced their ambitions to dust. They had convinced themselves you were their opponent. The conflict was theirs to win. However, they had accidentally joined a fight that was not theirs to wage. You had never been alone. You never had to retaliate. Because individuals with a purpose do not go alone. There are forces that stand. Watch. Simon, on the other hand, is unyielding, sheltering without recognition, and acting long before danger arrives. Battles are made to break. You were dismantled before you knew they existed. Threats that should have gained traction were repressed before they could manifest. Nothing on the scene or unseen could alter what was already decided. They had tried. They had failed. They now suffer the consequences of that failure. Everything they planned for your ruin drove you forward. They had discussed, plotted, and waited for the moment you would collapse, certain that their strategy would be the one that worked. They saw themselves as victorious. Imagine their hands having the potential to transport you from your current location. But they never understood this. Nothing can halt anything that is already in motion. Their emphasis on your failure was proof of what you carried, confirmation of their darkest fears. Nobody strives to destroy anything insignificant. Nobody fights against something with no value. Their willingness to see you fail was the most obvious sign that you had already won. Because people without authority represent no threat. And the fact that they tried so hard proves just one thing. You are unstoppable. They thought they had control, that their deception was enough to alter the course of events. They believed that their manipulation would alter the narrative, that their deception would weaken you, and that their efforts would tilt the balances in their favor. Instead of hampering your progress, they drove you forward by trying to block your path. They unintentionally become the driving force behind your progress. They intended to silence you. However, in their attempt to quiet your voice, they made it echo louder. The objective was to break you, but all they managed to do was discover a truth they had never considered. You cannot be broken. This is the paradox of fighting individuals who are called. Every attack intended to bring them down becomes the gasoline that drives them on. It has always worked this way. The more obstacle they encounter, the higher they fly, and the more opposition they face, the more unstoppable they become. History has often verified this. Because what is decided cannot be reversed, what was intended to be destroyed is raised. It cannot be repealed via any force. No betrayal can alter this. No approach can handle it. Once a purpose is formed, it cannot be undone via human interference. They convinced themselves that they had power over your destiny, yet their intentions were nothing more than whispers carried away by the wind. The facts never worked to their benefit. You were never the one in danger. They were. Because the moment they turned against you, they unintentionally fought something much beyond their understanding. And now, while they cope with the aftermath, you go on, not as a victim of their intentions, but as someone unaffected by them, standing in a place they could never reach. You remain unshaken. You move on with conviction. And those who once believed they could control your destiny are now impotent, as their attempts crumble to nothing. Move boldly. You're surrounded by an unstoppable force. Let them whisper. Let them plan. Allow them to work in the shadows. Convince them that their actions will remain hidden. It will never change what has been written. You do not stand alone. You never have. With each step you take and every issue you encounter, there is protection, moving ahead of you, beside you, behind you. These are not your responsibility to bear. These aren't your conflicts to win. What rises against you is not restricted to one person. It resists the same force that beckoned you, the irresistible power that shields you. This is why their plans fail. That is why their strength diminishes. That is why, once all is said and done, you remain standing. They are left to face the repercussions of their own acts. Never fear what is planned in secret. The truth always comes out, and justice never sleeps. Keep walking. Keep standing. Continue to press forward. No force can penetrate what has been sealed. No attempt against you will be successful. Let them all come to a complete grasp of one thing. Those chosen do not form.